What's up, college football fans and Mean Green fans? Sonoy Valente here once again with the Mean Green Show today, joined by John Fields, and we're going to take a quick look into day one of spring football and just get John's perspective on all the things that he's seeing and going around there. But before we get into all of that, guys, you already know the drill. If you're a fan of college football recruiting, the G5 football world, any or all of the above, consider hitting that like and subscribe button because that is truly all that we talk about. John, how have you been, man? It's been a while since I've talked to you, and I know you're super busy with all the great things going on with basketball, amongst other things. But I mean, how's your workload, and just how are you feeling, kind of edging towards the end of another spring semester?
Yeah, no, it's been, as you said, it's been a busy semester because I'm doing this stuff for 247, obviously covering a pretty historic men's basketball season going on here. And then I'm doing sports editor stuff for the campus newspaper as well, the North Texas Daily. And then I've done a little high school coverage for the DRC as well, a little freelance work with them. So been trying to get, a little bit of everything going. It has been obviously pretty busy with all that stuff going on in addition to classes and that kind of thing. But I mean, just exciting times really with basketball season kind of winding down here, football spring practice starting up. I mean, just a lot of fun stuff going on. And I will say, just to start, like, just being back out, on the football field again after a while, getting to watch practice and that kind of thing. It just felt really nice. And you could feel the energy, just surrounding the whole thing. Everybody was excited to be back out there.
Awesome, awesome. Maybe some of the basketball energy will overflow into spring practice. That'd be cool. Um, Real quick, okay, well, before we get into it, I want to talk real just briefly about basketball because, yes, it is historic and everything, but where can everybody find you, Ed, and the stuff that you do for North Texas as well as other stuff?
Yeah, well, so the best place to find me is on Twitter at JohnField0. That's where I'm going to be tweeting most all of my coverage. I'll tweet out all my stories. And then you can follow at MeanGreen247 on Twitter for all my stuff for them. The North Texas Dailies on Twitter at NT Daily. We'll have all our sports content for the campus paper on there. And then, yeah, I mean, pretty much everything will that we do will be on Twitter for all the various platforms. So that's the best place to find me.
Gotcha, gotcha. And I'm going to leave a link to John's podcast, Taking the Fields, and it's on Apple and Spotify and what's the other one? The
Yeah, it's on Apple and SoundCloud, actually. I don't believe
Apple and
it's on Spotify.
SoundCloud. There we go. The two S's. This is my dyslexia. But anyway, guys, yeah, be sure to tune into that if you're not doing that already. John does an exceptional job covering all things North Texas and has Matthew Bruni on quite a bit with him too. So very, very great content. Absolutely. All right. So yes, quickly about basketball. It's I don't think it's a far stretch to say. I mean, Coach McCaslin has built a Conference USA dynasty here in Denton, and he, just historical things, one right after the other. It's so much fun for us fans. My wife and I, we've been able to make it to 3 games, brought our son to 2 games. Just he loves it. I mean, it's so fun, right? So let me ask you this. What do you think we can retain Coach McCaslin? Do you think there might be any draw to, like, he's won championships in Conference USA? Maybe there's some allure. We're going to the AAC. He could win there. Like, kind of, you know what I mean? Like, you think we can keep him here for a little bit longer? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's always tough to predict because, I mean, one job opens up across college basketball and dominoes start falling and, then anything can happen, right? But I mean, at this point, at least it seems like, I mean, I guess it all comes down to really what happens in March here, because if UNT makes another big run in March, a big head coaching job opens up somewhere, in the Texas area, probably. I mean, I'm sure McCaslin would be one of the first guys getting calls about that kind of thing. So that's always a tough thing to predict. But I mean, as you said, they're really making a lot of history at UNT. They've won the most Conference USA games in program history this season already. Got a chance to tie the record for most wins by a Conference USA team, like in conference play ever, because Middle Tennessee had 17 back in 2016-17 it was. So UNT gets another win here later this afternoon, and they're able to tie that record. I mean, just a lot of positive things going on that side, and yeah, I mean, time will tell how long or whether they're able to retain McCaslin, because it just feels like the nature of G5 sports really is that, the good coaches, the good players are eventually going to filter up to the higher ranks. Who knows how long that'll be for McCaslin and those kind of guys. But, I think the biggest thing probably for UNT fans and just even for myself as someone covering UNT is to kind of be able to enjoy the time that's happening now while it's lasting, because stuff like this obviously doesn't last forever, especially at the G5 level.
Absolutely. All we can do is hit our knees and pray that McCaslin stays. But anyway, moving on to football. And there's a lot of questions, obviously, from the North Texas fans of what's going on and stuff like that. And we'll start off with the defensive side first, and move to offense and do quarterbacks last. So, when been following your Twitter page and seeing the videos you put up, and let's start with the D line. I think that was our strongest unit last year. With the Twins, Deion Noville, not to mention Enoch Jackson, Rod Brown, his true freshman. Just really, I think we had a lot of depth and a lot of talent. And obviously, to lose Deion Noville to graduation and pursuing the NFL, and the Twins hit the portal. So we took a big hit there as a whole unit, I feel like. But what are you seeing from the D line? I saw you posted a video of Rod Brown, doing a drill, and he looks great. But so what are your thoughts on the D line?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because as you said, they lose the Murphy twins to the portal. Obviously, in theory, they could come back, but nobody really thinks that's a possibility with the offers they've been getting at P5 places. And then you lose Dion and Caleb Colvin on the inside. So really, you lose all four starters along that D line. And, another key guy in Cam Hill off the bench, who ran out of eligibility, the ACU transfer, was a guy who had some sacks off the bench. So you lose all five of those guys. And I mean, it certainly takes a hit to the depth, but I mean, you look at least across, a potential projected starting group, and obviously you got Rod Brown back, you've got Enoch Jackson back. Those guys look like they'll probably be, the top two guys along the interior of that defensive line. And then, out in spring practice, saw Tom Trebe out there working, the College of DuPage transfer, and it seems like he's probably slotting in to take that defensive end slot, the one that Grayson Murphy was at, not the devil spot where Gabe was at. We'll see who factors in there. But Tom Trebe's a guy who made a real first impression. They had some one-on-ones between the D-line and the offensive line, and Trebe beat Casey Mareka a couple times. Not that Mareka was a big-time starter or anything, but still, promising positive signs to see there early on. Trebe looked good in some of the drills, and seems like he's going to be probably part of that top defensive line group for him.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you about Trib specifically. So, is he significantly bigger than the Twins? The Twins, what's his size like? What does he look like in person? And, so like, what's his, I guess just kind of start from there.
Yeah, he's definitely a big physical dude. I don't know. If you like just what he's listed at 6'3", 253 is not like absurd size, but it's pretty good size for a guy on the edge there. So he doesn't necessarily look like this massive physical specimen of a guy, but certainly looks like he's got, plenty of size to play the spot he's going to be at. And he's a guy that's got proven production at College of DuPage, put up a lot of sacks, a lot of tackles and that kind of thing. So, definitely looking like he's going to be much needed impact there with all the guys that are losing.
Right. Awesome. Very exciting. Okay. So moving back to the linebackers, obviously I think the biggest, name in the bunch is obviously KD Davis coming back, which is, a delightful surprise for North Texas fans. But who else is sticking out to you, if anybody else at this point? Again, it's only day one. Not everyone's going to be at peak performance. Most won't be day one of spring. And, maybe we can have you on later on in the spring season and kind of recap how the development is coming. But anybody else sticking out at that linebacker position?
Yeah, I'd say Larry Nixon's a guy who I saw getting a consistent amount of reps out there. He's one who's obviously been kind of a consistent figure in that linebacker group for a few years. Didn't start a whole ton of games last year, I don't believe, at least not early in the season. I think he might have moved into some of that later in the year. But obviously him, Kevin Wood's another guy who will probably continue to be a big factor in that room. Jordan Brown's a guy who saw some significant time off the bench. I could see him continuing to be a factor. And then I don't know how much you consider the Eagle spot kind of a linebacker type of spot, but I think Sean Thomas Faulkner is probably, the de facto guy there at this point, considering he was the backup for Tyreek Davis last year there. And with Tyreek being gone, Sean Thomas Faulkner seems like he's going to factor in pretty heavily at that spot. And then Bryce Linder from Glenn College is a guy who's probably going to get some reps there as well. I don't know how it'll shake out between those two guys. But from reading what Brett Vito reported when they signed Linder, it sounded like they were recruiting him to play that Eagle spot. So I'd assume he'll factor in there at least somewhat.
Also, Bryce Drummond recently got moved over to linebacker. How
Oh,
does he
right.
look?
How do I forget to mention
Yeah,
that?
yeah, right. How does he look? Does it look? I mean, does he? I mean, he's obviously a physically built kid, so I don't think he, I don't think he looks awkward per se. I mean, I wouldn't imagine, but is it kind of weird, knowing he was quarterback just a few weeks ago in our minds? But I mean, how's that looking so far?
Yeah, it is. It's strange to see him over at that spot after seeing him throwing with the QBs all of last season. But I mean, yeah, obviously, as you said, he's got the size certainly to play linebacker, and he's got some of the high school experience. Latrell said he was an all-state linebacker in high school, which I wasn't able to find confirmation of that anywhere. But I mean, he 247 profile had him at 104 tackles as a sophomore linebacker at Pawhuska. So I
Well,
mean, it's Pawhuska, a smaller Oklahoma school, but still, that's some production at linebacker you can point to. And Luttrell said he feels like Drummond might have a higher ceiling at linebacker even than he did at quarterback. I don't know how much we want to read into that, but I mean, certainly he's going to have a chance to work his way up there. Going to be some growing pains as there is for any linebacker, young linebacker that doesn't have a lot of on-field experience there. But I mean, he's a guy who might be able to factor in there long term. I don't see him being, an early impact guy there, certainly, but time will tell, I guess.
yeah, very cool, very cool. All right, moving back to the secondary, kind of a lot. I feel like I don't know, from the outside looking in, there seems there's a lot of just movement and maybe potential guys go. I mean, with Logan Wilson being activated, we got Nakwasa coming in, and just again, just it feels like that group has just been kind of revolving. From
Yeah.
my perspective, who's. I mean, Deshaun Gaddy, where do they have him at, corner now, or is
Yeah,
he?
yeah, he was slotting in at corner with John Davis at one of the other corner spots. It seemed like sort of that first group of defensive backs. So they had those two, and then I mean, it's tough to read a lot into which groups are which at this point because again, it's so early. They're still integrating those new guys into the system and that kind of thing. But I saw like Keelan Crosby got some time at safety. He played there in the bowl game. Harold West saw some time at safety. Nakwasaw was another guy who saw some time at safety. Zahadri Jackson from Utah State saw some time at cornerback, and there's several other guys who I'm sure I'm forgetting to mention there. But yeah, there's just so many faces in that room. It's kind of hard to tell at this point who's really going to take charge and be, some of the guys in that room. You'd assume Gaddy and Davis are probably those guys at corner, considering their experience, but somebody could still unseat them. And then I feel like the safety spots are probably more of the uncertainty at this point, just who's really going to fill those.
Yeah, yeah, very cool. All right, so moving to the offensive side of the ball, starting with the offensive line. Do we have some tackles out right now? I mean, are we, are we at full stock as the offensive line goes for spring, or are we kind of playing with a shorter deck?
Well, yeah, and obviously with Jacob Brammer, hitting the portal, that's going to be a tough loss at the right tackle spot. There were a couple of the starters who weren't like full goes per se. It seemed like at practice, like Manasseh Mose was one who obviously, starting center throughout much of last year, played some right guard as well. He wasn't necessarily fully out there doing everything, but
Hmm.
he was still out there participating. And then Cole Brown, I think, was a little limited as well. But I mean, at this point in the spring, a lot of that stuff doesn't really mean a ton
Hmm.
necessarily, especially for guys who have been on the team long term like that and been long term starters. I mean, you'd expect them to be fine and up to speed by the time the season rolls around. So none of that's very concerning at all. Um, I guess I wanted to clarify too on some of the injury stuff because Brett Vito had reported several guys who were like ruled out for spring practice, and like Quinn Whitlock was out there practicing. Obviously, might not be a full go coming off the injury that he had. Tommy Bush was out there and looked decent. I'm sure they'll move along cautiously with him considering his injury history, but same kind of deal. Those guys were at least out there doing some of the drills, running around, that kind of thing. It was nice to see Oscar Adaway out there. Didn't have a helmet on, but he was still out there practicing. So, pretty much almost all of the guys out there with, potential injury concerns were at least out moving around, which is always a promising sign to see.
Yeah. Anybody sticking out on the offensive line? How's Gabe Blair looking?
I mean, yeah, Gabe Blair's probably one of the more exciting guys just coming back after, he literally pulls out a starting role his freshman year, which is pretty rare for an offensive lineman. I mean, he's a guy that'll certainly be factoring in there. And then, yeah, I mean, Dazion Carroll, I think, was slotting in with some of the center reps, which he did in, I believe, the bowl game when Mose shifted over to guard. But So that gives him a little versatility. I mean, there's not a whole lot there. I tell you who one guy that is a little bit of an interesting, more long-term prospect there is a Tonga Lolo. So he actually played
Mm.
defensive line at Lamar, but they've got him moved over working with the offensive line at UNT. I mean, just a massive dude, 6'5", 316 pounds. So he's got certainly the size to play some offensive line. Probably more of a long-term project there, obviously, just learning the position coming over from defensive line. But he's a guy who could be interesting down the road there, certainly.
Is he at guard or what are they?
I honestly, I didn't see him do a whole lot of team stuff. I was, watching a bunch of
Gotcha.
other guys, but I saw him doing some of the individual drills with the offensive line. So we'll see. I mean, yeah, you'd assume with that size, probably slots in more on the interior. Probably not as mobile of a guy potentially to be on one of the tackle spots, but we'll see what happens.
Very cool. Very cool. Very exciting. All right, moving things to the backfield and the running backs, and I'm assuming hard to tell, right? And with Attaway still being, inactive, let's start off with Attaway first. So, how's he looking? How's his body looking? Is he still looking like the freak that we all remember him being? And does it seem like he's able to move around on that knee? And it was an ACL, right?
Yeah, it was an ACL injury. I mean, as you said, it's a little tough to tell because it's obvious that he's probably not all the way 100% back at this point. I mean, ACL injuries are like that. It always takes a while to recover, but I mean, he certainly still looks like, the physical guy who really lit it up a couple years ago. Honestly, I didn't get to see a whole lot of him last season, or I mean, nobody did on the
Mm-hmm.
field, but like last season was my first one really thoroughly covering the team. So I guess I don't have as much perspective on that as some other people might, but I mean, I'm sure Attaway is going to be a factor in that room as long as he's, 100% as the season gets closer. And then, I mean, they've just got so much depth in that room. When you look at Akaika Ragsdale, Isaiah Johnson, Io Adei, all of these guys that they've got behind Attaway, assuming they don't start over him early in the year. I mean, time will tell, but you'd assume Attaway's the guy if he's healthy. So, I mean, we'll see how that all shakes out. But yeah, running back's definitely one of the positions you look at and you're like, they got enough guys coming back. There shouldn't be much concern there.
Yeah, yeah. Any indication of who's taking, the first reps as of yet as far as the running backs go? Is it Ikaika? Is it Johnson?
Yeah, it's tough to tell at this
Yeah.
point, I would say. I think Attaway was taking some of them as far as like no touch kind of stuff. Like, but again, not a lot to really read into at this point. But
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so I guess, yeah, time will tell
Yeah.
at the running back position, really.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. So receivers kind of want to, okay. So Jair Shorter's not participating, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then Tommy Bush is limited. How did Tommy Bush look though with the limited stuff that you did see of him?
Yeah, I'll be honest. He looked pretty good. He didn't look like he was, limping around or anything like that. Looked pretty solid. As I said, I'm sure they'll bring him along slowly so that he doesn't re-aggravate anything or anything like that, or have any complications from that injury he had in the SMU game last year. But he looked pretty solid with some of the catches he had. Caught balls from several of the quarterbacks. Really seemed like he was getting a lot of targets in some of the QB receiver type drills. So it'll be interesting to see, how he factors in. But assuming he's healthy, he definitely seems like a guy who could be a pretty key part of that receivers group. Talked with Rod Burns after practice, and he said as much, where he felt like Tommy was a pretty big loss for them last year. Seemed like he was kind of coming into his own before he went down. So
Mm-hmm.
he's definitely going to be a guy to watch. Another one I want to point out is Jay Macklin. Really made a pretty nice first impression, I would say.
Really? The
Yeah.
Missouri transfer. Mizzou.
Yeah, he had several pretty nice looking catches, had a couple little one-handed grabs and stuff. Didn't really drop any passes or anything. So, I mean, he's a guy I could see factoring in as well there pretty early on.
That's exciting. And again, first day of spring, not doing anything too crazy. How does he look after the catch? Does he look springy? Does he look, what's he
I
look
mean,
like? How?
he definitely seems like a guy who's got a little twitch to him, a little speed to him. I mean, obviously didn't see like a crazy amount of stuff, but from what
Mhm.
I did see, I mean, he's definitely an intriguing guy going forward here, just with obviously the physical tools and, the lineage coming from, the Macklin family. That's always an
Yeah.
exciting thing too. So, I mean, we'll see how much he factors in, but definitely made a pretty solid first impression from what I could tell.
Very cool. And Roderick Burns looked
Yeah,
solid
he,
as well.
he looked like
Yeah.
his usual self from last year. So,
Yeah. What about Caleb Johnson? Wasn't, just a little hair over a year ago. He really lit the UNT fan base, ablaze with his commitment. I mean, just such a highly rated recruit. I believe he redshirted last year. I don't think he was in 5 games.
Yeah.
So how's that looking? I know he was recruited by a lot, but as a defensive back, we said, we'll take you as a wide receiver. And I think that's what he was mostly interested in playing. But how's that looking? I mean, is it looking like he could be, day one of spring? How's it looking, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, he looked fine. I saw him have a few catches. I don't know. I mean, obviously, we haven't seen him really factor in a ton at that receiver position yet. So, I mean, another one of those guys where, as you said, it's early in spring practice. We don't really know a whole lot, but I mean, had a few catches, didn't, look awful out there or anything, which is always a good sign. So, I guess, yeah, another guy where time will tell, really.
Okay. All righty. So I said 15 minutes before pre-tape. I said, let's try to keep it as close to 15 as we can. We're not going to do that because we haven't even got into the QBs yet. So here we go. We'll just let this go where it goes. But all right, man. Quarterback. Here we go. So Austin Auni's coming back. And I wanted him to come back, and I'm glad he's back. I'll just put it out there, at least, whatever. I think it was a little bit interesting what Brett Vito reported, that he said he is coming back, but this is for sure his last year. I don't know
Yeah.
why I found that so interesting. I mean, I just kind of did. With the goals being hopefully trying to win, and this is what I believe I read from Brett Vito of Austin saying, yeah, with the goal of trying to win a conference championship and a bowl game, and then going to ride off into the sunset after that. I found it a little interesting, like if hypothetically, if we were to go to make a bowl game and win it, and he's a starter all year long, why not come back? But I don't know, just kind of did you read anything into his statement of, this is my last year, I'm going, but this is it, even though I have 2 years of eligibility? And you putting any stock into that statement at all?
I mean, I think it makes sense to me just with the fact that he has a kid now and that kind of thing. So, he's going to want to be spending more time around his kid and all that kind of stuff. So, I think it makes sense for this to be his final year. Honestly, speaking completely from personal perspective, I was a little surprised that he came back for this season, just with that fact that he had a kid so recently. Seemed like indications could have been that he was finished up, but evidently, he feels like he's got a little unfinished business, as you said, looking to help UNT break through for that bowl win under Luttrell, try to get that conference championship and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, as you say, I don't know how, like, it's not much of a negative necessarily to have him back, as some UNT fans have been kind of upset about it, because again, I mean, at least what the floor is going to be then at that
Exactly.
point, because you've got a guy who was able, obviously had his struggles throughout the year, but was able to help, the team, win all the games in a row that they had to get to bowl eligibility and, find a way to get to the bowl game. So I think it's always a positive to still have that experience in the room, even if he doesn't end up being that guy when the season rolls around, which obviously it's really early to be able to tell any of that. So we'll see. I mean, he's the incumbent, so you'd assume it's his job to lose probably at this
Mm-hmm.
point, but well, I mean, we'll see how that room shakes out.
Right. And you and Bruni, make the comments of, we've seen what Austin Aune is. And I get what you're saying when you guys say that. And I don't necessarily disagree, but let me just throw a statement out here. And what do you think about this? Let's say, Austin Aune retains the job. He goes in as the starter. And yeah, we've seen a fair amount of Austin Aune at this point, but the last
Yeah.
2 seasons between him and Bean and then him and Reuter, I would say we've seen at least a full season of Aune, like, whatever. Kind of trying to make a case for Aune, though. I mean, lost basically all the receivers. I mean, Bush and Shorter and Simpson, and I don't know what. Maybe in another show we'll talk about Lorenzo Thompson. I just haven't heard much about him lately, but we'll stay QBs for now. But anyway, didn't really hear much from Lorenzo Thompson last year. Anyway, lost a lot of guys, and so do you think there's any way, if he is the starter coming in, he could make an impressive step forward with, playing with a full hand of receivers and having, a lot of game experience now going into year 3 as kind of a starting role?
I mean, I could see him taking a little bit of a step up, just having those receivers to help. Again, it's tough because I think one of the major concerns, if you will, with Ani is the deep ball, because that's one of those things where, I mean, he's missed his fair share of those deep shots. He hits the one to DeTravion Brown there late in that UTEP game, so they can hit that game-winning field goal. But by and large, the deep ball's been a little bit of a struggle with him. But I mean, as we've mentioned, at minimum, he gives you the serviceable guy that can hit the short, intermediate type stuff, maybe give you a deep ball occasionally. And I will say it's been kind of strange because we've seen different sides of Ani. Like I was looking back on some of the stats and we've seen him, light it up in some games, throw for like 5 touchdowns a couple seasons back. And then we've seen some of last year where it wasn't as impressive. So, I mean, with a fully healthy core of receivers, with guys like Tommy Bush, Jay Macklin, you could certainly see a step up in production. I don't know that it would be a crazy jump, but I mean, if he finds a little more consistency with that deep ball, which I don't know that we can necessarily expect, but maybe he does. I mean, you could certainly see something there.
Okay. So with Drummond, at linebacker now, it seems like there's really only 4 QBs that are being evaluated, I would guess.
Yeah.
And Austin Ani, Jace Ruder, Earl Stone, and JD Head.
Yeah. Stone Earl, but yeah.
Oh, yeah. Stone Earl, my bad. And do you feel like they're going to have to cut that list to 3 fairly quickly? I mean, I feel like 4 is just so hard to evaluate. And do you think they'll narrow it down to 3 sooner than later? A, and then B, I mean, so that's my first A question. And then B, how's everybody doing? How's Jace looking? How's Stone looking? How's JD looking? Is any of the quarterbacks from, again, day 1 of spring, no one's at their peak, whoever, JD could have a great day 1 and, maybe not the rest of spring, obviously. But so A, do you think they slim it down to 3 quickly and let those 3 compete? Because again, 4 is just a lot to go around for reps. And then B, who's sticking out to you so far day 1 of the QBs?
Yeah. I mean, as far as the 3, I don't know. Like it feels like, especially when we ask Luttrell about those questions, he doesn't always love the quarterback questions either. He doesn't necessarily love, doing the whole narrowing down thing. But I mean, I'd assume by the time fall rolls around and that kind of thing, they might not tell anybody, but they'll have an idea of who their top, couple guys are, I would think, by that point, because then you've got, the full spring parts of the fall to evaluate, what you've got in Stone Earl, JD Head. Maybe you see a little something different from Reuter or Ani, but you don't expect that, your evaluations of them to change a ton. I
Mm-hmm.
do think it is helpful that they've been able to thin out that room a little bit in terms of Case Martin hits the portal, Will Keeney, left early, but last season, but still get those guys kind of to thin out the room a bit. Bryce Drummond shifts over to linebacker, which just gives you a few less guys to evaluate in that room. I mean, Mike Blesh, the quarterback's coach now. So, I mean, we'll see how that room develops. I think in terms of just what I saw out of those guys, as you said, it's really tough to say much from day 1 of spring practice, but like I saw some decent flashes from pretty much everybody. You could see a deep ball or 2 here and there. I think it might have been Stone Earl hit a pretty nice looking deep ball at one point. They threw some intermediate stuff where nobody really looked awful at any of that. Some of the balls, fluttered a little bit, but I mentioned in one of my tweets, like Ani looked comfortable out there, like the way kind of a returning starter should. I mean, he just looked like a guy who's done this a fair amount of times.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if some of those transfer guys weren't a little nervous, like, hey, I got to make my first impression here type of deal.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that makes it a little tough to evaluate as well. But I didn't necessarily see anything awful looking from any of those guys, and not a ton to read into too far, I guess, which I know isn't maybe the answer fans or anybody else wants to hear, but it's just kind of too early to say a whole lot on those guys.
For sure. Maybe later on in the spring. One position we forgot to talk about, and it's kind of a big one, tight ends, real quick. I can't believe I skipped over that. Obviously losing Jason Pirtle. I feel like myself, you guys too, we've all kind of, knocked it. All right, not the most athletic guy, and probably not, it doesn't look like it anyway, but man, he really produced. I mean, he had some really big time 3rd down catches for us, just kind of like an old faithful guy. And yeah, I think he helped the football team a lot, honestly. Now he's done. He's did his 6 years here, and he's moved into the fandom, I'm hoping, of North Texas. And so, but I feel like there's some guys behind him, and Jake Roberts, Lee, Christian Lee, as well as Varkey's Gums, just those 3 alone. I feel like all 3 of them have potentials to be, blocking tight ends. Obviously, that's super important, but affect the receiving side as well. And you see anything day 1 from any of the tight ends? Is Roberts kind of stepping into that role right now as far as the lead guy? And And any, out of those three, what would you see day one of spring?
Yeah, I think Jake Roberts is probably the de facto guy there at this point, just because he's had more of the in-game experience than a Christian Lee or a Varkey's Gums has had at this point. But man, I mean, Varkey's Gums does continue to be an exciting guy where if they could get him some time as kind of that H-back guy, just get the ball in his hands and let that athleticism work. I mean, just an exciting prospect there. I think Roberts is obviously, as I said, kind of the front runner, the guy who, I mean, seemed like more of a blocking role last year at times, where Pirtle was kind of the pass catching type of guy. But maybe Roberts steps into more pass catching this year as well. I could certainly see that. And then, yeah, Gums is a guy I'm excited about. Christian Lee's a guy who's shown some pass catching ability as well. So I think any of those three could certainly factor in. And then, I mean, there's guys behind them, but I agree. I think those are kind of the three probably to look at this point. Maybe you see something from Asher Alberding at some point, but I think those three are probably the ones that are going to be getting some of the heavier looks there.
Very cool. Well, John, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it. I know you've got a full slate even today. It's Saturday morning currently, and keep up the great work. We love seeing all your content, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon. Hopefully, I can get you back on before spring football's over.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate getting to come on again, and yeah, hopefully we'll talk again soon.
All right, man. Thank you. Take care.
All right, you as well.